I moved to LA straight out of high school to be a session guy. At that time, it was 1977. And so I go to this bar to do that gig, and the other guitar player was Dean Parks in this guy's band. And Dean was quiet but super nice and was real complimentary about my playing. Dean, if you don't know, man, is just LA legend session guitar player. That's the job I wanted. And Dean, I tell Dean that, and he's just like, oh man, sure, I'll help you out. Let's do some sessions. Come do things with me. I go, okay. So that was probably my first one I remember. And I played on Madonna stuff, for example, but then I played on probably 30 different records of people record companies hoped would become Madonna, and they both paid the same. You know what I mean? And so you would do them, you're a session guy. But you're sitting there and you're copying a Madonna song. And at some point you kind of go, well, I'd sure like to just be doing the Madonna songs. There was one day where I got home from doing a session and I go, not doing it anymore. Every time somebody calls, I'm going to say I'm already booked. Because I'm not going to tell anybody I'm just quitting, but I'm just quitting. And I go, I'm going to concentrate on producing. I'm going to put a little studio in my basement. That was my first real album. Made that in my basement, and it was this band called Timbuk3. We had a hit song called The Future's So Bright, I Gotta Wear Shades. They got nominated for a Grammy, and I was a producer. I knew tons of engineers, real producers, tech people like Charlie Bolus, all these sort of people, and I could tap into that. Things I didn't know how to do or things whatever, I would call them up and go, what's a good compressor? How do you record a kick drum? So that's what I did. So I bought a Ampex MM1200 tape machine. I bought some mics. That's when I bought my Fairchild. And it seemed like a lot of money then, and now it seems like not as much money, So I called around and just put out the word to people I thought, that I knew, I thought it'd be helpful, that I was looking for a console. And between the big three, between an API and a Trident and a Neve, I felt like an API was the one I could afford. And so one of the people I called was Brent Averill, who was at the time the Neve guru probably in the world. But he calls me a couple of weeks later and he goes, I found a console I like for you. There's a couple of problems with it. And I'm like, what? And he goes, well, one, it's a Neve. And I know you want an API. And I go, well, I'd rather want a Neve. Can I afford a Neve? He goes, well, that's the other problem. It's not for sale. Let me talk to the guy and see if he'll sell it, and let me see how much he'll take. And then you see if you can afford it. And I go, okay. He calls me back. He goes, okay, I got him talked into it. And he told me the price. I go, well, that's about double what I was thinking it was going to, I would spend on a console, but it's a Neve, huh? He goes, I'm telling you, Dennis, you're not going to regret having this console. I think the sound, the kind of vibe that a console like this that can give to something everybody will talk about the warmth, analog warmth. And that's true. I mean, the analog thing is an analog thing, and this is prime analog thing, right? But there's also there's just more elements to that. I like the push in it. There's a push you can get from the console. Like something can be exciting, but you wished it was more especially exciting, right? And you can go through here and you can make the console work a little bit harder. And then it starts to take on a new kind of pushed characteristic. It's not distorted. It's not kind of bit, crushed or any of that sort of stuff. It just has this kind of little more thing, and then all of a sudden it really can bring out life if that's the right thing for that piece of music, Or you can, I've used the mix backwards. I've used the console backwards in that sense, where you hit it too quiet and you make the gain output of the console work a little harder. Whole different sound. That's an amazing sound. Bigger, it gets bigger, warmer, fatter. I ended up with a Dumble amp. So this guy Howard walks up, really instantly a charming character. Like he's got a kind of weird half grin on his face. And he's got a funny vibe. And he goes, Dennis. And I'm like, Howard. He goes, I want to meet you. He goes, I love your playing. I go, oh, thank you. I'm glad you like it. Thanks. You know, like, and he's like, you know, he goes, I make guitar amps. And I go, oh, that's awesome. And he goes, I want to make you an amp. And so we meet up a couple days later, and we talk about stuff. I remember he asked me, is there anything that your amps lack right now that you wish you had in your sound? And I was like, I'd really love to have a presence control for being in the studio where I can adjust presence, but it's a preset. Like I could have a setting I like, and I can switch it in and out. Or I can then vary it depending on how somebody's mic'd me or how things are sounding or whatever. And he goes, that's neat. I've been thinking about presence controls. He goes, I can do that. I would do that. That sounds cool. The engineer mic'd it up. I think it might have been Roger Nichols, actually. It was, I forget what the project was, but I think Roger was the engineer. And he mics it up, you know, the Steely Dan guy. And he mics it up, and I start playing, and I'm sitting out with the amp, and I go, whoa, this sounds good. This is a good amp. And I start playing with it, and it's got the little trim pot adjustment right there for the presence, which I can still find on Instinct, if you noticed. Yeah. I can just, I know where that knob is. Switch it in and out. It's like, I start playing with it, I go, this is good. I get some sound, I start playing something, and Roger comes out and he goes, that sounds amazing. It's like nothing, I'm doing nothing in there. It's amazing. So, you know, I'm hanging out with Howard one day in his 5-story pagoda in Pasadena, you know, like you do with a Howard. And I'm like, golly, you know, he goes, do you want another amp or anything? I go, you know, I've wondered about a 100-watt version. You know, what would that be like? And he goes, oh. He goes, yeah, could be fun. And he goes, I've been wanting to do something in black suede. And I go, let's do it. I go, how about a 100-watt one? You know, same basic thing. I like this speaker, you know. It's the same speaker, all that sort of stuff. But I go, do it as a combo, 100 watts, black suede. Done. So, you know, a few months later, that one's done. Never quite sounded as good. This one's got it. And that one sounds good. This one's got it, though. It's one thing to try to manufacture something that really has it. You know, it can be done. It's hard to do. You can set the stage for it more than you can make it. You know what I mean? But like, I think in our world, in entertainment maybe in general, having a sensitivity to when you're in the vicinity of it is really valuable. It's just a standout. You know, I have a blackface Fender Deluxe that's great. I mean, it's a great sounding blackface Fender Deluxe. You play through it and you go, there it is. That's that blackface Fender thing. I love it. It's great. But I think, too, for my preferences, you know, this, I could just do things with this I just can't do with those others. It just sounds a way that it's just the most special. This is one of my first purchases in building out a small studio in my basement. You know, one of the recommendations was a Fairchild compressor. And of course, I love Revolver's one of my favorite albums. There is no better bass sound to me than the bass on Revolver. I was like, well, maybe I can find one of those. And I called some different people I knew, and I called Alan Sides, who I knew would have a lot of equipment, who's, you know, had his famous studio and was a famous engineer dude. And Alan's like, yeah, I got a couple of Fairchilds right now. One of them's great. One of them's a great one. He goes, you should get that one. I go, okay, so I go down and I played with it. I listened to it. It even had you know, Alan would do this. He had a little tag hanging off of it with handwritten best written on it. It's like, well, it must be the best one, you know. But it also seems to enhance, for my money, the way the low mid-range articulates in bass. And that's just crazy useful. It's just, it's like it nearly sounds like, say, a bass player's playing with their fingers. It sounds like you've gotten kind of more push or more articulation or drive from the fingers, right? But it's not trebly. It's not like 2K. It's not even 800 hertz. It's like it's doing it with the bottom. So now the bottom you're getting more kind of push of the articulation of bottom. And I mean, that's James Jamerson. That's Paul McCartney. That is what you want bass to do in a track. And you can go back and listen to Beatles records and you hear that. You think about it that way and you go, you know, why does this song move so good? And you go back and listen and you go, well, Jeff Emmerich recorded it and the bass is making the song move good, and it's Paul McCartney, and it's Paul McCartney through a Fairchild. I came about these in a way that's meaningful to me, where an engineer I did a number of records with, Rich Hassel, who's really great, and who ended up moving with his wife to Denmark. These were his dads. But like Rich, it meant so much to him that he had kind of rejected his dad giving him these mics for so long, because his dad kept saying he had these 2 mics under his bed, and he wanted to give them to his son since his son wanted to be a recording engineer. And the son's like, Dad, I don't need 2 TIAC mics, you know what I mean? I know you got some nice Radio Shack mics and everything, Dad, but you know, forget it. It was years before finally, he's like at his parents' house for a holiday or something. Dad goes, I gotta get those mics out for you. I've had them under the bed, you know. It's just one of those stories. And Rich finally goes, okay, Dad, let's go get the mics. And he goes and he looks at the boxes. He goes, Dad, and he opens the box. He goes, why do you have these? The dad's like, oh, you know, I took piano lessons and got a TIAC, you know, reel-to-reel machine. I was going to record myself doing my lessons, so I thought I'd buy a couple mics to use with my TIAC. And Rich is just like, okay, well, thanks, Dad. I can use these. And he takes them the next day to a Don Smith session and shows Don. And Don's just like, Rich, what? And it's, you know, and it's just not heads and tails. You can line up a bunch of mics on a singer and a bunch of great vocal mics. And sometimes an Elvis Costello walks up to a mic like that, and it's just, his head got twice as big. You know, it's like what he's saying got 30% truer. And it's just it. You go, well, that's not even a contest. Get those other mics out of the way and see how fast you can hit record, please. You know, you're in that mode. So I mean, and now I'm in a situation where I can't use them as much as I wished I could. And so I think somebody else should. I got turned on to Frank when I moved my studio and stuff to Mississippi by a bunch of the Memphis people who really knew what they were doing, like people like Terry Manning and John Fry and Jody up at Ardent, all those people. And he gets where he agrees to come by the studio and see what I got and talk about it. And he comes by and sees the Fairchild. I remember he worked on the Fairchild once. He sees the console, he sees my stuff, and he goes, do you have schematics on everything? He goes, I know how to work on all this stuff. I go, you do? He goes, oh yeah. I go, do you have schematics and everything? He asks me, and I go, yeah. I go, I do actually. And things I don't have, I can get, you know, they're findable in the world. And he goes, okay, I'll do it. I'll be your tech. So Frank started working on my stuff, and in the early days of that, he tells me, yeah, he goes, you know, I also build gear. I don't know if you know that. And I go, no, I didn't know that. He goes, well, I made a lot of the stuff Terry Manning uses. And so that was like ZZ Top, I don't know, Big Stars, a lot of cool stuff Terry had done. And he goes, yeah, Terry, I make outboard gear for Terry. So Frank brought over some of his gear. I started trying it. It was amazing. And so I got really into it, as one might surmise. But also, I saw it as an advantage. Like here I am with being this guy in Mississippi with this studio in Mississippi, and I already kind of got a bent way I look at music, and I'm making these kind of bent records. And if I'm kind of if I have gear I can kind of pull from and get sounds and little tints to it that other people aren't doing, and I do that consistently across records, I'm seeing that as maybe more branding, more valuable for me, you know, and like I like it, and I'm using it and I like it. Like one time we had an 1176 that I just loved. Things sounded great on a whole lot of stuff, and I was doing a record somewhere else, and I think Walkman came and did a record at my studio because I was working away. And I check in with my tech one day, and he goes, oh, we sent the 1176 was acting a little funny, so we sent it over to Frank to fix it. I go, no, how's it sounding funny? I go, I love that thing. It broke? And he goes, no, it's just a little bit fuzzy on background. I go, no, I love that. Is it too late? So I call Frank, and I go, Frank, did you change that 1176? He goes, oh yeah, I just fixed it. I go, oh. it had this amazing thing to it. I was using it every time I wanted this thing on background vocals. I went to that 1176. You know what I mean? He goes, well, you know, I still have the chip. It was a bad whatever it is. Not even necessarily a chip. It was a bad whatever it was. And he goes, I still have the parts that were causing the problem. He goes, would you be interested in me making another 1176? And I put that part in it. And then I could even put a switch on it, and you could take it in and out. And I go, yeah, that sounds great. And you can tell which one it is because, oh yeah, he put, it's the CLDEF 11, and the DEF stood for defective. As the relationship went on, and as, you know, if Frank had a slow couple weeks coming up or something, he'd come to me and goes, there some piece of gear you've been thinking about buying, or you wished you had in the studio you don't have? And I go, well, you know, like, maybe an SSL, standalone SSL bus compressor. I go, I've been kind of wanting that sound sometimes and to use it on the back end of the Neve mixing or something. And he goes, oh, I could make a better one of those. I go, what if you did one that's just really the SSL, kind of has that same SSL thing, but, you know, Frankify it, you know, make it, you know, give me that edge, give me some edge, man. I go, and I'll be into it. It sounds good. And so he did. He made this little SSL-ish baby, but yeah, it worked out great. It's just it just sounds a little bigger and a little more, full frequency response. But it also still has that SSL characteristic EQ to it. These two limiters are tube, and they're based on UA175s. Which I have a couple of UA175s, and those are great compressors, and I liked them, so these are kind of based on that. Frank made solid state and tube pre's, and I think these are a couple different, 3 different inceptions of the solid state mic pre's, which sound amazing. They're really fast in the front, so they're really good with transients. If you want something to kind of hit a little more, like you want a snare to speak the right way without EQ, things like that. Just outstanding solid state pre's. And I think these were designs he came up with while he was working for Terry. But then, so he comes to Oxford, kind of isn't making stuff so much for Terry. I get him to make he shows me a couple things, they sound great, I buy them, you know. But like, then he's going to start making more gear and stuff, and I started talking to him like a friend. Like, I go, Frank, you know, if you're not making stuff really from Terry's backing anymore, you should come up with your own name. He goes, oh, you want me to call it Sweet Tea Gear, like my studio? And I go, no, like your name. You can call it Frank Audio or something. And he goes, okay, I'll think about that. And he started naming everything JFL Audio, which is J. Frank Lacy. And so that's kind of why there's different names. And he stuck with the JFL thing, I think, pretty well, you know.